pull that off?
Well, he never looked so good. I understand that. But this is the way he set it up. When I go in to open the meeting, I can only go in to open the meeting as Brad. So.
Who do I talk to fix our whole setup here? Brad.
Well, we don't have IT, the IT we have at the moment. We don't have that for that much longer. So.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. So why don't we look at the meeting minutes from May 7th? It's not May 7th, it's April 7th.
It's actually March 3rd.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
All right, March 3rd meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve March 3rd meeting minutes?
I make a motion to approve the March 3rd meeting minutes.
I'll
Any second? Phil? All right,
Second.
any discussion, changes, corrections to the minutes?
I didn't see any.
Hearing none. All in favor of approving the March 3rd meeting minutes as posted, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Thank you. We're on to Regina again.
Okay, so we have a few chapters to review, but really the major substance is in chapter 6. So chapter 6, definitely we have some discussion items. We want to go through that. And we also want to go through the land use table.
Okay.
Then also at the bottom of my email, there is a list of parking lot items for the future. And we should probably go through that as well, because now that some things are more official, like the city will happen, and with that, if I am understanding correctly, a DRB planning commission model, it only makes sense to make those edits right now.
Is that's in the charter
Yes.
that we will have a DRB model?
Yes.
Okay.
So
that
I
as
don't,
of July 1st, all of us are out of a job and we have to reapply.
Well, some of you will probably get back in, John. Yeah, I think it's up to you. You'll be deciding whether you want to be PC or DRB, and going on what the CCRPC said would be a good model. I've told the trustees that there should be one person at least from the PC that's also in the DRB, so there's continuity.
I don't know if you can do that. Can you do that?
You can.
Anyway, yeah, I was on the thoughtful growth committee that went through all the various models, and maybe someone else was on that too. But we did end up saying that at least in a potentially merged community at that point, that we would still move to one PC and 2 DRBs, right? So each community could have the review authority stay, or was it the other way around? I can't remember which, but it
was one PC and 2 DRBs, John.
Yeah. So you know, I think the stats are across the state, 80+% are following a DRB model. So we're kind of in the minority at the moment.
It seems to be the periphery, the south of Vermont and the north of Vermont that are not.
Yeah. All right. So I'm just calling up all the rest of the documents. You know, I was all ready for in person. I had everything ready.
Bring any chocolate?
So I'm just going to call up the email that Regina is referring to and all the documentation, but we have it. So do you want us to go through your letter first, or do you want us to go through chapter 6?
yeah, so that was my question to you. There's a couple of things on that future list item that we might as well just sort of like talk about right now and make sure that everybody is either on board with it being a future list item or a now item. So if it helps to just sort of start with that conversation, we can kind of get it out of the way.
Let's start with that conversation first.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Robin, you gotta give me host ability. Sorry, we could have been on
I
this
did
a
that
long
already.
time
Hold
ago.
on.
Gina, Regina, when you say future or now, do you mean future, like not in this version of the LDC, or do you mean future meetings?
I mean, future, like not in this package of LDC updates.
Okay.
There you
And
go.
part of it, okay, hold on. Okay. Here we go. All right, so, can everybody see this?
Mhm.
5.5
Yep.
EC
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So, one question, and I've been meaning to reach out to Mia, but I haven't had the chance. So Patrick, I'm not sure if you have a sense of where
Yep.
the housing committee is on
So
their
they met
recommendation.
with the developers. They had a really good meeting, and they have basically, like a white sheet proposal to come forward with and discuss with us. And so I can reach out to Mia. They were going to talk about it and kind of finalize it at their last housing committee meeting, which was supposed to be a couple of weeks ago, right around the time we were supposed to meet last.
Okay.
But I think they're kind of now uncertain as to what their future of their committee holds, because they are a
that's
joint
wondering.
committee. So they're trying to go through that discussion as to what it looks like between the town and the city. But I do think that Mia would probably be ready at our June meeting to come forward with that white paper and kind of explain what they've come up with and what they want to propose in terms of inclusionary zoning.
And it's clear they're still on inclusionary zoning. That hasn't changed. That's really the,
Nope, the idea, they're looking at making it mandatory for construction, build outs of 10 units or more, where there would be I think it was like a 12 or 15% affordability rate within those build outs.
okay.
And so that's basically what they're kind of looking at.
Okay. All right, great. Because you have mentioned before, Patrick, in a way, ish, it's possible that this is not an enormous lift. If the housing committee is very clear on the parameters, we could, borrow and steal other people's language and just get those parameters in. And it makes me feel better that they've had developer conversations. So
Yeah, Patrick, can you just give us I was thinking about that today, as a matter of fact, that my basic feeling is still, number one, our problem is housing. Number two, our problem is affordable housing. And I don't want to support something that, I don't want to support item 2 without knowing what the impact is on item 1. In other words, if we make an inclusionary rule on development of housing that actually leads to a negative impact on overall housing development, that would be bad, in my opinion. So I'm just trying to find out, what did the developers have to say about the notion of having inclusionary zoning in Essex Junction?
I'm trying to recall as Mia described it. I believe they all kind of said it would be a challenge, but not a challenge that they would be able to overcome, something that wouldn't necessarily scare them away. And as long as we kept the requirements and incentives to a point where it wasn't too much, where if, the 10-12% of units. So think about some of the building that was just put up with, what was it, like 30 or 60 studio apartments right in downtown. So 3 of those 30 studio apartments, 3 or 5 of them would have to be at an affordable rate, whereas the other 24, 25 could be at market, and with no strings attached or nothing, no ceiling to that. So they could certainly make up their difference there. It's not like we're asking them to hold 50%.
Yeah,
Or-
and the definition of affordable is also critical to the whole situation here, and I
Yeah.
think they were looking at a range from it was 80 to 120%. I mean, it was kind of a weird range because it seemed like it was close
Yeah.
to what market rate was anyway. So you can kind of play with that evaluation and that number until it doesn't really hurt that much for the developers, and yet it may have some benefit to making more affordable housing. So I guess as long as the white paper and the results of what they're proposing is consistent with not deterring investment in housing, I agree with Regina. It's not a big lift to get that in to this round of the LDC.
Yeah, if what they come forward with looks good, I think, yeah, I'm with you too. That we should just kind of put it in now, especially knowing that there's some developments right ahead of us that we would like to include some affordability within, knowing that there's, as Robin can attest to, there's challenges right now with one building that is trying to go in at to be all affordable or majority affordable housing. If that one's not going to go, then we need to be creative with other ways in which to get
At
affordability.
this point in
within
time,
the
from what I
development.
hear, no buildings in the village center district could have an affordable housing component. None.
Well, yeah, within the triangle of train tracks.
And if they use HUD funding, which
It's-
isn't
well,
the only,
Yes, that
Funding.
is true, Regina. Yep, that it just disqualifies them from HUD funding, which is CDBG and home. There are other ways, especially if you're looking at like a 10% inclusionary, as some of you can attest to, like you can apply to Vermont State Housing Authority for a couple project-based vouchers, and that
All right.
locks in the affordability of some of those and also creates an avenue for almost guaranteed rent for a portion of that's due every month.
Every unit in this building was supposed to be affordable, not just a percentage.
And can we get Maura Collins to kind of chime in on whatever this proposal comes out as? Because I'd love to hear what she has to say too. We have an expert in the field right in our community, so that would be helpful.
yeah,
Makes sense.
Mia
Yeah.
works for her, which is helpful.
All right, well, that's
Um,
great. So number one, I think we can say that we're poised to take action on that one during this round of updates, and if it all comes together, fabulous.
Okay, so chapter 11, Jim Jutros had some potential suggestions for sewer regulation changes, and my understanding is this largely was tied to, I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, Robin, but the results of an appeal of a permit, and that is still unsettled as far as I know.
Right, yes.
Okay, so I think we're still holding on this. Then the next three things are really in the category of, if we had all the time in the world, we would fix these up. I'm not really too concerned about these three. Your floodplain rights, they're not like bad. They work fine. You don't really allow anything to happen in the floodplain reg, so it's okay. Number
Let me
three.
Can I just add something on the floodplain? So it turns out that a lot of the village isn't formally mapped. We just had a project that needed to go out and basically touch base with the powers that be that delineate floodplains and get that cleaned up. So I don't know how that works exactly for the rest of the community, but it would be nice if we had a more completely defined floodplain delineation. Is that something, Robin, is that something that we go out, how do we go out and get that? I mean, it's not really related to the LDC exactly, but
Well, we'd have to It would have to engage consultants to do that, John.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
thought-
Go
well,
ahead,
excuse
Diane.
me. So I thought that the floodplain delineation and mapping and such happened prior to our last editing of this document.
We
And
had something done, Diane, when I had to sign the village up for federal flood insurance. We weren't when I first started here. So we had to go through a process there and got us signed up, but that would be 12 years ago. So
Okay, so that's out of date, so we need to do it again.
I would say, so.
Okay.
I thought much has changed, but it's probably out of date.
Pretty much after Irene, they all got more excited about flooding in Vermont because, you know, it turns out to be a thing. And we had a project that involved a building that was on a parcel that had more than one building on it. And the other building had been, you know, they had to go out and get data that said, okay, they know where the floodplain is and they were okay, but it didn't apply to our building on the same parcel. So we had to go do the same thing. And it just feels like, you know, if we can keep track of the notion that we should have all of these things delineated to the best of our ability, it would be good for us as development in the junction that, you know, that we know, okay, you're in the floodplain or you're not. That would be great. So sidebar, but thank you.
So let me just explain a little bit of what I understand about this. So the floodplain was delineated long ago in the state of Vermont. Then there was an effort to digitize those lines. It wasn't necessarily an effort, like a field-based effort to really make those lines more accurate. It was simply to put them in a GIS format so everybody could work with them in today's modern world.
Yeah.
So there isn't necessarily an effort, because this is a federal program. You can't really just.
Yeah, it's FEMA and the Corps of Engineers and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is very much a part of the process where an applicant, if they're in the floodplain, have to do a little of their own certification of exactly what the elevation is in comparison to the river, if you want to change something or do something different. So I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more that Essex Junction could do. But I could be wrong. And the only reason why I'm pausing is because some of the major tributaries are in a little bit of a different category. Winooski is one of them. And partially that's because it's so restricted and dammed. Yeah. So I'll see if I can find anything else out, but I'm not sure there's a whole.
This one was actually Indian Brook, and it was a parcel that's right adjacent to it on, you know, basically by where 81 Main Street is. And it just seemed odd to me that right in the middle of the village, essentially, we have trouble telling developers or people that are landowners there whether they're in the floodplain or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Then sign standards. Your regulations are not content neutral. They should be content neutral. It's just a level of effort that within my contract time period to help you guys, I can't get that done. So I think it's got to be on the next round, at least from that perspective.
So even just removing the language that says what can and can't be on there.
Yeah, because you really have to, like, if you really look at and read through the sign standards, and this is typical, it's not like unusual for Essex Junction. So much of the regulations are written based on the type of sign that it is. And so it really is a little bit of an effort to say, like, okay, we are going to completely divorce ourselves from the thinking of it being just a sign in place for like a grand opening or a sign that might be loud. Really, it's tricky in the temporary sign category, which there's
Yeah.
thousands of.
The only other piece that I see in the signage that we might want to deal with or not, and I think this came around the last time we did signage, was the concept of electronic signs, or essentially, you know, things like, the only one that I'm aware of that we actually have is at the fairgrounds. Although we made some attempt to, based on the, I think it was actually 81 Main Street, the town wanted the ability to get rid of their 1970s, you know, wood sign and have something that might more effectively communicate things to the public, like your taxes are due or
Mhm.
something, you know. And so
Right.
there was a municipal effort to allow some electronic signs. And I think the only place we said we could use that was at municipal properties, and maybe that didn't even include Park Street Park. You know, it was pretty weirdly written, and I don't know if we've had a chance to go back to that and look at it, but essentially you had to be incredibly special to get permission to use an electronic sign.
John,
And
may I interrupt?
so,
John,
Yeah.
I thought it wasn't just the town office. I also believe it was the rec department on Maple Street.
Yeah.
Because they wanted some flexibility.
Yeah, they did.
but they kind of even had an idea of putting one in, and I'm not sure they ever got permission to do it. And I just thought, you know, overall we should revisit that scenario in case we wanted to change anything.
Yeah. And there are definitely some more modern standards to put in for those, just to make sure all kinds of things like that it's the right lumens at night, so it's not too bright at night. It doesn't flash
Yeah.
too
It's not
often. You know,
changing
there's
the thing often enough that people are distracted.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So then the last one on this list is
This is a big one.
a big one. And we thought last time we talked, we were going to hold this. And now it's kind of a little bit, there's two things going on. Whether A, throughout the whole thing, we're going to stop calling it the village and call it the city. And then the second thing is, well, three things. Robin has a suggestion of changing the membership of the planning commission from 7 people down to 5, back down to 5 people to help with the quorum issue. But also, I'm guessing, Robin, that conversation is sort of moot. Well, maybe it isn't, because you're still going to have a planning commission, but you don't have to talk about them in the LDC anymore. So that's just going to be removed from the LDC.
Okay.
The development review board, you'll have to decide if that's 7 members or 5 members or something else.
Well,
I will say that when you're talking about a DRB, it is very helpful to have alternates, way more so than a planning commission.
can I ask a question that is maybe completely relevant at this point, which is the scheduling of all this? We aren't going to possibly have this finalized and approved before July 1st, which is when, you know, so by the time we issue this, if it goes out as is, it's out of date on July 1st. So I think we actually have to do it. We have to make all those changes.
Mhm. I think you're probably right, because this process in and of itself is not quick. Once you folks feel comfortable with the draft, you're going to put it out for public hearing. You're going to have your public hearing. You're going to make edits that you heard from people during that process. Then you're going to send it to potentially a city council. and they're going to have public hearings, and they might make changes, and then they'll adopt it. It's a months.
Right. So in a way, this is ideal timing in that we've done the work that we needed to do as a planning commission, and yet there's this whole other update that's required, essentially as editing, to realign the LDC with the revised charter. And it's going to overlap, and because it's all happening essentially at exactly the same time, it's brilliant. I think it's going to be fine, but it will need to be done, because by the time this is adopted, after all those review processes, we will be a city. And so I think it has to happen. No, I don't know exactly what the details of that look like, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. The only other tricky thing, Robin, that would be helpful to know is, are people's titles going to change? Because that's the other annoying thing in this, largely on the public works side, because there's a whole bunch of different staff kind of identified throughout the LDC right now. And will those people's titles change?
My understanding is that there's no change to titles
Okay.
at this point in time.
So does that mean essentially you can do a search and replace, and anywhere that it says village, you just change it to city? And
That's what I'm thinking.
yeah,
I hope so. And I might, right now your whole LDC exists as separate Word documents. Every single chapter is a completely different Word document.
yeah.
I'm hoping I don't know if anybody has an issue with this, but I'm hoping I can just make them one Word document. And then that all of this exercise will be 1,000 times easier.
I would give you the flexibility to do this the most efficient way you see possible, because I think essentially it's asking you to do more than was originally contracted, and we got to work this out.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So that's the end of the other list. So let me stop sharing. I think what makes the most sense now is to look at chapter 6. So let me share again. Sorry, one sec. Okay, so we're going to kind of move through this document by the comments. So hopefully you're seeing, if you're looking along on your own versions, you'll see those on the right-hand side, but I'm also going to be sharing my screen. So there are a number of particular zoning districts that require planned unit developments. If there are, for the most part, it ends up being a multifamily development of 5 units or more. So a planned unit development really is structured and set up as a subdivision of land. It is my opinion that if there's no subdivision of land associated with a housing project, you really shouldn't have to go through a subdivision review process. You really should be able to just simply go through a site plan review process. It's one of the many reasons why we have overcomplicated review processes, and housing is the biggest thing to suffer from that. So there's a couple of these districts where I don't really see any benefit in sending people through. And I should say also, the planned unit development process is even more complex than a subdivision process. And so it's really an extra level of review that I don't think is necessary. And to me, in the village, delineating a project as 5 residential units or more as something that's like bigger and scarier, that should have an extra level of review, is way too small of a threshold, in my perspective, for housing in the village. So my suggestion also, I'll just point out, in some of these sections, the purpose of this section is to say that a planned unit development should be reviewed for the standards that are specified. And these standards are useless standards. They're not really saying anything when you read what they were saying. So given that, for the first 2 that this comes up for, multifamily 1 and multifamily 2, I don't think you need this. I think we can take it out. We can definitely allow somebody to apply for a PUD if they want to. There's no reason not to, because a PUD does give you some flexibility if you need it. But I don't think we need to require it. So let me just show folks real quick where MF1 and MF2 are, so you can get a little bit of a sense of where we're talking about.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that in general, because what I'm in favor of is helping people understand why they're applying as a PUD. Because every time we say, well, it may be, the things come in and we don't know if they are or they're not, or whether we required it or we didn't require it, and that's confusing. So I think the trade-off has to be very clear that you should be coming in as a regular development unless you choose the PUD route for an exact reason, like you want something and you're willing to give us what we want to get it, right? And that language has not been clear, and it would be great if we could clarify that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just taking a note. And then the last thing I'll say, that part of my reasoning behind this too is, if folks remember, we're adding that design review overlay into these areas. So the MF1, so folks know, it's this stretch way out here at the end of Pearl Street.
Okay.
MF2 is on Lincoln Street. It's this kind of brickish sort of looking space here and here.
And that's it.
And that's it.
So what we're saying is that we will let you present as a PUD if you choose, and in order to make that decision, these are the rules. This is what we want.
Yes. And particularly here in this change, we're saying, just because you're in one of these 2 areas and you want to do a residential project of 5 units or more, you don't have to go through PUD approval.
And that would mean that you're going through the development review under the normal rules.
Yeah. And so,
And with
to
the new
double check.
overlay, we would have design review as well in those areas.
Yeah. And really what it ends up doing is, if the residential developer who's coming in wants to sell these units, they want to subdivide, literally subdivide, so they can sell parts off, then yes, then they go down the subdivision track. If they don't, it's all going to be maintained collectively under one ownership structure in the future. It's a site plan with the design overlay. Well, it's the design overlay will come into play either path, but
So it's a PUD review with 5 or more units on essentially one lot, all reviewed as a community that needs to have the whole picture figured out. And then if they're going to sell individual units, are they, what do we call them? Postage stamp? What do we call that?
Well, you
footprint
can,
lot.
I mean,
Yeah,
you could even
footprint lot.
condoize.
I mean, you could condominiumize the 5 or more units on a given lot, and let people buy them like condos. But the overall development is regulated as one thing.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, because condos aren't necessarily, those don't necessarily require a subdivision of land.
Right.
Those are almost a different legal structure that's without town. There is no municipal authority in that
Well,
structure.
there's usually an HOA that governs the overall
Yeah.
entity, and then within the HOA structure, which I guess we normally get to see the rules. The rules apply to the overall parcel, and it's up to the HOA to enforce them. But within that, we don't really get involved with who's buying what property and what they do to it.
Right.
And that's very common in many places. Happens all the time.
Hmm.
And I don't know, those lots, there's a lot of development happening along that little stretch there on
This
the
guy.
yeah, there's quite a bit going on right now. And most of what we're seeing, physically as you drive by are fairly large developments.
Mhm.
Some of the lots may need to be joined together in order to make any more of them, but there's some pretty big apartment units going in there.
Okay. Then next up on the list is the multifamily residential 3. So there is also the same requirement that if you're doing 5 or more units, you have to go through a PUD and MF3. And that is this area. So this is Grove Street, Central Street. Can you guys see my cursor?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Then East Street, Kings Court, Oak Street, Church Street, kind of tucked in here. These two orange, they're kind of
The
hard to see
orange
because they're
ones.
very close to the yellow. Those were the only ones that gave me pause because I'm not sure if this is true, but in my perception, these are a little bit more of a kind of more residential area. And would 5 or more units feel like a very different use, and should it get looked at a little bit more?
I'm struggling to think of any lots that are big enough to support 5 or more units.
Yeah, they're all pretty little.
They're pretty small, and it feels when you drive down Grove Street, for example, you don't feel that one side's different than the other. One side is
Right.
yellow and the other side's orange, but when you're driving
Right.
down there, you don't feel any difference.
John,
Yeah.
remember that we had a request to rezone a lot? And I thought that was in the Grove Central Street area.
It might be, but from what I
And we
gather,
denied that
we don't
request.
normally rezone one lot at a time.
Well, this is true, okay, and we had denied that, but it would have done probably what could have been a 5-unit development in that spot. They had wanted to do, if I remember correctly, it was like on the corner near the high school on Central, if I remember right. And it is somewhat open. Okay, I think it's like
Yeah,
parking
well,
lot or
most of
grass.
that lawn is got infiltration chambers under it now after their last water management program. So I don't know exactly what they might be able to do there, but I think the issue is like I'm only seeing a couple of lots that might support 5 units, but we have the density issues and the parking issues that could be resolved on a lot that would give somebody enough space to do 5. And I think in general, we're trying to support that. In theory, we're trying to allow increased density where it works. And it's mostly a function of lot size at that point, because they would be coming in what you're saying is instead of the normal rules applying, they would be able to come in as a PUD and get some other arrangement.
Yeah,
and
then,
we
yeah.
get to ask for superior design or something, that we've asked for with the PUD.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is right now, the regulations require them to go through PUD. What I'm suggesting is they would not be required to do that. They would have the option to do that if they want to.
I think that's fine.
Now I have to completely correct what I said before, because I'm just realizing I got confused between these districts. We're talking about multifamily residential 1. It's this white and orange circle pattern, and then multifamily residential 2 is this tiny orange circle pattern.
I
So
lost your cursor.
sorry. So never mind about this blue hatch. We're
Ah.
not talking about that district. I'm
That's-
sorry. And
that's-
never mind about this red area. We're not talking about that.
Okay.
We are talking about these white and orange places. Can you see my cursor now on West Street?
Yeah.
All right. So we're talking about here. They're kind of scattered all over the place. This back here off of South Street, over here behind Pearl Street, off of Prospect,
Oh, okay.
way up here at the end of Athens. So actually, when you start looking at these lots,
They're
they're
big. Yeah.
larger.
They seem to match some existing already large developments that are in the
Right.
village.
Right. So there might still not be very much
There's
more.
the autumn pond, there's Brickyard and
Wickham Woods.
Dunsmore, and the one at the end of Camp Street. That's a bunch of condos down there.
Yeah.
I don't see
Right,
that
so
there's a
there's-
lot of open space in those there because they've already been
Any of
developed.
them.
Right, but I guess what you're saying though, Regina, is if they so choose in the future to subdivide these off, they would have to go through this PUD process with us, even though they currently are potentially developed for the most part. But if they wanted to subdivide sections of them.
I
Yeah.
think he's trying to tell us they wouldn't necessarily have to go through PUD. They could choose to go through PUD, but they don't have to.
Yeah. If we made this
Yeah.
change.
I still think that makes sense, and I think, like John says, that makes it simpler about the PUD process. That you can choose to do it because it offers you something, and it offers the village something, the city something.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll make that change then. And then let me just make sure we're clear. So the multifamily residential 3, that is still the same thing. Those are the orange that we were talking about. And it makes sense to make this change there too, where you would not be required to go the PUD route.
Yeah, it's really more of a carrot, right? I mean, if they want
Yeah.
to do the PUD because they believe they get something, then we believe we get something too, right? So that is, I think that's fine. I don't think we should be making people do a PUD just cause. I think we should offer that as an incentive for them to provide a higher level of development, design, whatever it is.
Okay. All right. Just making these notes and then getting down to the next section. Okay. So let me just stop sharing for a second. Sorry, it's just easier to see all these screens. Okay, so now we are getting ourselves back into the village center district changes. If you've got this at home, we're looking at page 75, but let me share again. Okay, and we've talked about these changes before, but let me just sort of quickly go over why we're doing them. Under the purpose, we wanted to bring in the concept of the design 5 corners plan. So we did that. This demolition section is just redundant. There's a whole other section down below that talks about demolition.
Excuse
I'm
me,
kind of-
Regina,
Yeah,
before you push on, is it possible to have that design 5 corners hot linked so that someone can go to the design 5 corners plan and see what we're talking about?
that is possible. It's a little bit less of a common practice in regulation. But we can probably do it. It might just move over time and then this will be broken, but I could probably at least put in, what I'd be more inclined to do is list the actual URL.
Okay,
So that,
However
At
you do
least-
it, that if somebody's reading through it and
Yeah.
they are on a computer, they want to click on it and find out where it is, it takes them to the document.
right.
will do.
That's, yeah. Well, however it works, to me, it's kind of like we're talking about a concept. And I think if somebody wants to know what that concept is, they should be able to get to that.
yep, that makes sense. Okay, then we've got some changed language in here that just tries to better define the historic structures concept. So before you had this sentence in there that was just a fragment and didn't say anything. Documentation from the State Division of Historic Preservation, documenting a building's eligibility for the state or national register of historic places, nothing. So I'm just trying to sort of clarify in here that this is how you would define buildings that are exempt from the historic preservation design standards.
Yeah, it's a
So-
little weird because to be eligible, all you have to do is be 50 years or more old. And so that pretty much is every structure in the village at this point.
Right.
And that's a rough bar to, you need to have somebody go out and decide whether it's contributing or not or whatever. It's kind of a pain. And I guess I would, just as long as we're talking about linking things, if map 2, which is the historic districts, is a link to the map, that would be awesome. Right, you know what I mean? Like, we have a map that we did for the village that lists all the buildings that we think are important historically. And it exists, and it would be really nice where we're talking about what's on the list. I just have a link to it.
Yeah, right. Okay.
This only applies to the village center district though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to be clear, right now, on this language, it's only the village district. We do have the overlay down below that we'll go through.
Yep.
So is this helpful, what I put in terms of what makes a building exempt if it's already been delisted? Or if the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation finds that it does not meet the criteria.
Yeah,
Or
I think
two, it gives the applicants an opportunity to work with a qualified historic preservation consultant to come to the village and make the case. Because these guys, the state office is really not in the business of just making these determinations for any old person who wants to come. I don't mean old person, anybody who wants to come in and ask them for that. they're in the business of figuring this out for Act 250 and the other programs that are
Yeah.
run through the state office, not necessarily to help a municipal review process figure out if somebody's eligible or not. So part one would just be because they have that information otherwise, that might be because they were required to go through Act 250 or something else. Or two, they can secure information from a qualified historic preservation specialist.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, then we took out again this kind of weird connection from a PUD to these
Mhm.
buildings on these streets. We talked about that a while ago. We clarified this concept of height, that it's really a maximum of 4 stories in the village center, as opposed to this adjustment that could be done just to keep it clean. Because I think it's
Yeah.
pretty clear that's where the village is now on 4 stories. Got in some language here on much more of this sort of like pedestrian, walkable, bikeable kind of concept. So when we talked about this before, this is sort of similar language that we fixed in the planned unit development section, because the planned unit development section was just sort of really squishy, like not clear what was required. Over there, we said at least 1 or more. We could say more than that for the village, like require all 4 or require at least 2 of these kinds of features. I think there should be some flexibility, because not in all circumstances will these 4 things be logical.
All right, so let's just look at that for a second. Let's look at of the 4 you have listed, and you know, ideally we could have 6 or 8 of them, but if
Right.
we have 4 listed, are there any of those that we would not want to have show up in one of our village center projects, right? And I'm thinking, you want the pedestrian access, so A should happen no matter what.
Mhm.
Pocket park, not everybody has a chance to do that. The covered bus shelter, you don't need one on every parcel.
Right.
Shade trees, okay, maybe you could do that one. You know, I might like to see that list fleshed out a little bit more, but I think you want to probably go after 2, at least 2 of those items, whatever they are, and the list could be longer. Does that make sense to anyone?
Yeah, 2 is what I had in mind right from the get-go as well. Shade trees,
know-
pocket park, I feel like could be the 2 that kind of go back and forth. Covered bus shelters, I mean, unfortunately, our public transit system in the state is not as robust as it could be. So you're right, I don't think covered bus shelters make
You know,
as much
there
sense.
could be an art feature or some kind of a you know, a pedestrian friendly installation of some kind. You know, it could be a bench, could be, I mean,
Right, well, that
a
kind of goes
fountain. You
along.
know, Robin, well, we were trying to get a fountain put in on a recent project. You know, just you want something that attracts you know,
Totally, John, I
people
think that
want
kind of
to be
falls in
there
line.
and gives them a way to engage. And you know, maybe it's a byway panel or it's a some other, you know, historic plaque or something. And then each property may have a different way of saying why they're unique and what's interesting about them and what they want to provide as a community asset. And it doesn't want to be the same thing on every parcel. It wants to really be open to interpretation, but I think it's fair to ask for at least two.
Yeah, I
John,
was just
there
gonna
were-
say it. Sorry, it
there
falls
were-
in line with the B there where it says pocket park or similar amenities as you were speaking out. So it's just listing out more examples of what those similar amenities may be that they could provide as a public asset. Go ahead, Dan.
There were benches that were along Pearl Street that were removed, and I don't understand why, unless they were provided by the property owner and they just decided it was, but some of them were close to, they weren't necessarily covered, but they were close to where people were waiting for buses, so it was convenient. But those have been removed. I didn't pay that much of attention to them, okay, but now that I've been in the disabled category, I actually find that I actually would have liked in some cases having some of those benches. Because of my injury to my leg. So I hate to tell you, but some of those covered bus shelters are actually a bench. So it is kind of nice to be able to sit down, when I can't do the distance. We don't have a lot of them. And quite frankly, the bus that is running, the covered bus shelter, even if it's not on a PUD or whatever, it might be nice for us to encourage those, because quite frankly, some of the rains and things that we've been getting, it would be advantageous to our walkability piece to have these bus shelters act as double duty here. But just speaking for someone who's a little more appreciative for benches than I used to be.
Do you have any sense on Pearl Street mostly, I assume, are there any covered bus shelters for the bus stops today?
Yes, there's
Maybe.
one in front of post office. Well, I guess it's not post office. Who owns across from Post Office Square?
Right in front of Max and Planet
yeah.
Fitness.
Yeah, Planet Fitness, I guess, is more of that. Then the next one on Pearl Street is way down in front of one of the Handy properties.
Okay.
Really? So there's
Um,
nothing in front of the Champlain Valley Expo?
There are
There are benches, but there's
benches.
nothing covered?
Nothing covered. No, it's their benches. Well, sometimes they're covered in trash. But that's not the covering we were looking for. Well, it all depends if they put the trash can out or not. Okay, I think it's the fairgrounds that does it, and they don't put it out 24/7. Okay, it's out occasionally. Somebody rolls down a carriage down there, and I guess it's just a matter of one of the stores comes and fetches the carriage again. But a lot of people, because of the bus requires no open containers on the bus, a lot of people are depositing open containers of drinks usually, or leftover food containers as they've been waiting. It's as we're becoming a little more sensitive to Green Up Day, which is this weekend, it might behoove us to ask for to actually have a public trash can as a possibility, so that we're a little neater. That
Yeah,
might be an
so
amenity.
right. Some of these things are, I think this list pretty came right out of Design Five Corners, but some of it is not necessarily, as I'm thinking through this, within the authority of a private developer, right? Like GMT is going to be very specific about where covered bus shelters should go, mostly because they're ultimately going to have to maintain them. So maybe we I get what everybody's saying, that we really flesh out more of B, so that makes sense. And then I think we could probably make C a little bit more generic in the sense of, depending where you are, make sure that you've got rest spots that are, covered in some way. They don't necessarily need to be tied to the bus, but
Yeah, it could be a bench with a, big shade tree over it or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
Yeah.
wouldn't that fall under the definition of a pocket park?
right. That's in B.
It might. I mean, a pocket park tends to have a little volume to it if it's just a bench tucked along the sidewalk, but it happens to have some nice shade trees around it or near it or over it, you could, it'll be fine. So or it could be a, low wall or something that just happens to define the edge of the development that you can sit on. There's all kinds of ways to pull this off. I think the point is we're trying to give the developers some direction in, how they might go about dealing with this requirement.
Okay.
Right, and that we'd like to see at least 2 instead of
Yeah.
1.
Yeah. And, this is really to set the bar somewhere so that even the people that aren't thinking about how they're going to make their property interesting and unique get a little bit of an oomph in the right direction.
Okay.
I think some of the projects that we've seen come in recently, the larger ones, the designers have been suitably inventive and creative in how they want their project to actually deal with people that aren't inside the building, and it's been really nice to see that. But other people, just developers, may not have as much experience with that, and we need to give them a little push.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, all right. Architectural elements or features, storage areas, service areas, trash, accessory structures, and parking areas shall be screened from view. Just have a question of whether that's enough, or do you want to be more specific that parking has to be to the side or the rear?
I think, isn't that language already in some of our other, in some other places? Like, all right, I'm downtown. It's not like I feel like I shouldn't see a car. I know I'm gonna see a car. I don't necessarily mind that the parking is obvious. I think, what the screening might be is open to some debate. I think what we're saying is don't make a nuisance out of it. And if you, we are supposed to be putting the parking behind buildings, or at least to the side of buildings. In most of the village center areas, we've been pretty careful to say that the building needs to address the street. And so I don't know that we're really going to get into trouble with this.
Okay.
Robin,
It hasn't been a
see
problem.
anything in there that I mean, I think we're generally clear about the principal arrangement of the street to the pedestrian ways to the building to the parking.
I would agree with that, John.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Again, still in Village Center District, we had this PUD section in here. I don't think it adds any value. Again, shouldn't require subdivision in the village, unless a subdivision is necessary.
Mhm.
Okay, then building height is clarified. Okay, that's village. Sorry, might need to, oh no, we're not going that far. Highway arterial district. This again has the PUD concept for a commercial PUD. Some of this is a little bit of a relic also because PUDs used to be defined in state statute as different ones, industrial, commercial, or residential. That was taken out long ago. Not seeing any value in this. Again, it should just go through, if it's a site plan, it's a site plan. If it's a subdivision of land, it goes through subdivision. If there's any issues with those, just stop me. Okay, looking for the next comment. So transit-oriented development, we talked about making some changes in here, broadly talked about making some changes in here. Then we talked about adding the overlay district, design overlay district to this area. And so we decided that's probably going to be good to test that out and see if you get what you need with the overlay added. Again, taking out this required, this PUD piece in there.
So I noticed that you left the PUD, the PC may approve. You left it in a couple of the ones above transit oriented. I just not wondered why. You know, if we're taking it out, do we take it out everywhere? Like it's in 607 in the MFMU2 district.
Yeah, I think I was
And-
inclined to leave it in those sections because at the moment it's a requirement.
So you just changed it to
these-
may instead of, okay.
Yeah, and these ones that talk about a commercial PUD, the commercial PUD is no longer a thing.
Yeah.
So it felt cleaner to take it out, but it still sort of is true even without us saying it, that anyone can apply for a PUD. So I could go either way. I get the concept of being consistent about it from one section to the next.
Well, I'm just, it is in that realm of clarity. So if you think that it's okay when you read through it, that it might show up in some districts, but it doesn't show up in all the districts, as long as there's something in there that says, doesn't matter what district you're in, you can apply for a PUD, here's how, or this is the rule. That's fine, but let's just take another breeze through that, not tonight, but as you're thinking about it, is if it's okay to take it out in most of them, the real question is, you know, why'd you leave it in a couple?
Yep, that's a good point. Okay. Scrolling. Sorry. Okay, agriculture PUD, it made sense to me to keep this. This is just a totally different world out there down by the river. There's some real logic in the way that this is crafted and described that it made sense to keep this as is. It's got a density bonus, like that actually is logical. Floodplain, we already talked about that. Here's another one of these PUDs. So now we're in the mixed commercial use district. I'm going to say to delete this also, but I'm keeping the part about you could apply to it. So I'll just run through this again, just under that same comment. But I did just want to confirm that in the village, Robin, you might need to answer this question. Can a person put more than 2 primary structures on a lot? Without subdivision? Because sometimes that's why a PUD gets kicked in.
Yeah.
And if-
unnecessarily.
And if that's what they want to do, and the only way for them to do it is to do it as a PUD, then that brings back the may, right? So that it gives the developer an idea that it's possible, if I want to do that, I have to present this as a PUD, which is allowed, and these are the ways that they're going to review it under a PUD application. I gotta show them how I'm giving them something. Don't let me do this. Otherwise, it's a standard thing,
Yep.
right? So that's fine. I
Okay.
mean, it's the carrot, it's the incentive piece that is important. Otherwise, don't come to us. It's a regular situation.
Okay.
And if that's the same language that you want to use on all of them, so that all the districts know that it could be a PUD, but you got to play the game. Fine.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Okay. All right. So now here we have the design review overlay district. Folks probably don't remember because it was a while ago that we talked about this, but before it was one section. And we were sort of trying to talk about design review plus historic preservation in one section. It was confusing. So first of all, that has been split out. And so it's clear the purpose of the design overlay, infill, redevelopment, carry out the concepts of design 5 corners and pedestrian friendly atmosphere. So I think the demolition issue, meaning you want to regulate and prevent people from demolishing structures, is only important if it's a historic preservation structure. Is that true?
As in, if it's not a historic structure, we don't really care that much if it gets torn down.
Right.
I mean, would this prevent a pit from forming?
None of it prevents a pit from forming. It
if
raises
there-
the bar for, I mean, a lot of what we talk about in our regulations in general is conforming or being compatible with the surrounding historic character of our village. And the underlying assumption is that our village has a historic character. And so in the sense that we spent some time talking about whether or not a particular structure or not is eligible for or deserves the protection given to historic structures. I think all that's tied together, and you may or may not agree with somebody that, just because it's old means that it's historic, but it gives people pause and a time to decide, not just by right you get to tear it down. You have to actually convince people that for whatever reason, that this is a reasonable thing to do. And that's a good thing for the village, because tearing something down is sort of inherently it's invasive, and we don't know exactly what that's going to mean until somebody proposes it for a given structure.
Well, John, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, there are some fine old buildings in the downtown area from our automotive past. Some of them not been so lucky as the
Ollie.
Firebird. Okay, but
Yeah.
some of them are a little more shall we say trashy to get right out there.
Yeah, but even the Firebird, if push came to shove and someone said, well, we want to take that down and put up something that doesn't look like a gas station that got converted, I don't know that we would say, no, you can't. That's a historic, gas station.
Well, there were, I think at one point in time, there was a gas station, if not on the corner of 5 corners, but or within half a block or a block of 5 corners. There were so many gasoline stations downtown that, quite frankly, if anybody didn't have gas, but there are some of them that still exist, and they are by definition historic because they're definitely over 50 years old. So I'd look at, I want to see what they want to put on the building, what put on the site. Yeah, that not to keep that building. You know, if it needs to go to create a different project, I don't want to see just because it's by definition historic. I won't necessarily want to stop anybody from creating a new entity there.
Yeah,
Or
and
theirs.
I don't think that's what it's saying. I think Regina kind of touched on it before when, you know, we were looking at the ways that something could be taken off the historic list, which is y'all decided, or you got somebody of professional skill saying it's not, it might be eligible, but it's not historic. So that's one way. Or that somebody else has previously delisted it by saying, guess what, you know, this is just an old building, big deal, right? So
Yeah, and just to, I should have started with this. So what we're talking about now, when we're thinking of these questions, is the overlay area. So we're not talking about doing anything different in the village. We're talking about now that we're going to subject development on Pearl Street and all these other arms out of the village. We're going to subject them to design review, and we're going to subject them to the historic preservation standards. And the historic preservation standards are only going to kick in if you're historic, which is not the easiest thing to define. But if you're historic, then the historic preservation standards are going to kick in. For the design overlay, I don't think we need to talk about demolition as a threshold for kicking a project into design review. Because just the fact that they're coming to you for anything that they do is going to bring in the design review standards.
because they're in
I
the
think.
expanded district. Yeah.
Yeah, though I guess somebody, so here's really where it would come in. All we're talking about here, not a historic building out here on Pearl Street. If they want to demolish the structure, like before they have a redevelopment plan. And so I think the policy question to ask yourselves and to work through here is there any building on Pearl Street that, or any of these other arms that are really important to keep the structure as is that aren't historic?
So my feeling is that the reason we want to do this overlay district is to kind of have an input in what these streets look like,
Mm-hmm.
and having a say in whether a building is demolished or not gives us that say. I mean, an empty lot from a demolished building can be just as unattractive as a ill-designed building.
You know, I'll pick on a couple of buildings that we all kind of know, but one would be the old village, I think it was Public Works, which is now Hamlin's engineering office.
Yeah.
You know, which is really a couple of garages and an office building tied together. You know, it's like, that's historic for a lot of reasons, but if somebody said, well, I'm going to take it down and put something else there, would you say, no, that you can't do that, you know? Or
But we're
the
talking
apartment
about,
building that's next door, that's also historic by definition of being old. But, you know, the most memorable thing about it is that somebody used the signboard as a, you know, place to put out their thoughts every day was, you know, more controversial than the building ever would be.
which I agree with you, John. And I think if someone we're talking about we're going to take this down and put something else up, I agree with you, but we're talking about someone's going to say, I'm just taking this down and I don't
Right.
know what we're going to do with the space.
Right, and then you have a pile of rubble or an empty lot that sits there for 5 years unused. In some ways, you'd almost want to see a blighted building because at least there's something there that's historic to look at if it was a historic building with some integrity or whatnot.
And do we
but
say anywhere else? Well, like Burlington, you basically can't take something down unless you have a plan to put something back. And, you know, the obvious hole in the ground, the side, the notion is that you're supposed to have a plan and you're supposed to tell the municipality how long this is gonna take and what the new thing that's going in is, so that they don't get subject to having a hole in the ground.
Well,
And that's in
generally-
their rules. I mean, we have to do that when we tell them we want to take something down. So do we have anything like that in ours that says if you're going to take something down that, you know, isn't condemned by the fire marshal or the village, the city engineer, that, you know, it's unsafe or it presents a public hazard? Do we have anything that says, no, you can't just take something down, you have to have a plan?
I don't know if you have something like that. Robin, do you know if you have something like that? Because it almost, that kind of thing sort of tends to live in the ordinance world as opposed to the bylaws.
From my memory, we do for the village center district. If somebody wants to take something down, then they have to get a written report from a historic consultant, the Department of Historic Preservation of the state, confirming that, you know, the building has no value or is not structurally sound. I believe it's in there somewhere.
Yeah, but
It's a
what if
long
it's,
time ago.
what if it's not historic at all? Do you have like a condemnation?
I mean, I'd like to see within that design review overlay, that if something is slated for demolition and somebody wants to do it, that they come forward with some form of redevelopment plan first, even if that
Yeah.
plan is as simple as, we're not going to leave an orange fence around it. We're going to put it in a small pocket park while we decide what we're going to do in the interim.
Yeah.
At least we know that the site is somewhat usable and friendly to an extent, and it's not just a big orange fence around a lot.
I like that idea. Thanks.
Oh, I have
So
a
it's-
question for you guys, and that there is currently a building on Pearl Street that's being used for a fire department practice. I saw I saw it on television, that they were, or Facebook or one of the various, I saw it in video form. And it was like, I went, hey, this is fantastic that somebody's decided to use, to donate the property to do that. But how long does fire department practice go on before the building needs to come down? And last time we saw anything was a guy that had a proposal that said, hey, would you be okay if I thought about something like this? And it's like, well, we haven't seen anything past that proposal. We've, on the other hand, have seen that the fire departments haven't practiced over there. So how it's you know, when do we expect, you know, something to come in, because you can only practice in a building for so long?
Wasn't that was that the building that was demolished to put up the new structure that's currently under construction?
No.
So the fire department went in and practiced before
No,
the.
that one was a few years ago. Yeah, no, this is a totally new building.
Oh.
This one's down closer to where I live. And so as I drove past today, I went, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I remember this one engulfed in flames. So it's like, how long is it going to go? Hey, I have to drive past. It's near KFC, who's still working on their ground.
Yeah, what exactly is happening there? They're not changing the building, so we don't get to see anything about what they're doing?
I have no clue what they're doing with the building, other than the fact that they're having fire trucks come and practice. But we haven't seen anything that they're, okay, when somebody offers a building to get practice, which is fantastic, by the way, for the community. But it'd be nice to see that they've got an idea of what's going in after the fire department's done with it. And I don't see anything in our code. Does that need to be in an ordinance? Or does that need to be in the land development code that you, because eventually it will have to be demolished. It won't be habitable because it's been fire
Yeah,
department.
we don't
practice.
want to see something with smoke coming out of the windows and plywood all over it.
No, it gets too exciting that way. You know, and I'm kind of going, is he going to do both buildings or are you going to do all three buildings? But
Robin, do you know, I mean, don't you know about all this stuff? Like if something has fire department practice going on, wouldn't you know that somebody's made a deal?
Generally not, no.
How is that possible?
Well, they're
'Cause
not doing anything.
It's not in the village center and we don't have any
But
purview
they're
over
not
the
doing anything. They're
demolition?
going in there, they're practicing, putting out a fire, they're leaving.
There's no memo that goes around interdepartmental like that says, by the
Nope.
way, we'll be practicing on on some building on Pearl Street. Don't be alarmed.
No, but there should be. I'll bring that up next time to the department head meeting, John.
I mean, I wouldn't really think that there's anything that happens in the village to a building that you don't know something about.
Ah, sorry. Sometimes we find out afterwards, as you know.
Well, yeah, that would be a mistake, but in general, I would think that you guys would be pretty aware of this stuff.
Okay, so I think that answers that question. All right, same question on the site features that you want to see. So again, we're in the design review overlay district, not the village center features. At least one or more. Do we want to say 2 here as well? And then I can clean up the B and C in the same way that we talked about up above?
Yep, I would support that.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Okay. And clean up. Okay. No, we already talked about that up above, not a problem. Okay, then now we've got this separated as the historic preservation overlay district. So this is essentially the same as I fixed things up in the village center. So you'll see map 2 is referenced, the description of exemption, and then everything else in here is basically the same as how it's written. And so here's all the more complicated demolition stuff associated with historic structures.
And does that apply to all the buildings in the village that have been listed, and there's 400 of them or something? And not just something that you can draw a line around that says this is the village center?
So the way that we're talking about this, so again, this particular language is not the village center, outside the overlay.
Okay.
So applicability for demolition, alterations, additions, redevelopment of buildings within the boundary that we talked about, the new overlay boundary, and within the historic districts on that map 2, or listed on state or national register of historic places.
Okay.
So basically map 2 kind of brings in the historic districts, or if you're listed.
All right. Because there's a drawing, and I don't know if it's technically a map or not, but it has a number next to all of the historic properties. And is that map 2?
Yeah, so if you really zoom in here, you can kind of see that the historic districts are, they show up as orange
Yeah.
if they're in the village center. So it's
Historic
these.
site
these-
has
these-
a little building on it. Yeah, I can. see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the districts themselves are pretty all encompassing. There might be a few circumstances where there would be a structure, like I'm seeing this one right now. On
Yeah.
Prospect Street, the structure itself is outside of the district. So that's a good point, John. Like we could also state, to be clear, that we also want to talk about structures that are listed on that map too. And you're right, all of that's on map two. These districts are on it, boundaries, plus all of the individual structures.
I'm just, it's really more about the structure itself than it is about some contiguous mapping. Because they don't necessarily all fall into a nice little package.
Yep. So does that mean you want me to just say if you are on that list?
I think so, because the list was developed by, qualified professionals that went around and surveyed all of the things, and they said, okay, these are your village structures that should be identified as, contributing or eligible or what have you. So I guess I don't want to leave any of them out, and it's not necessarily just because you're in a boundary that you can draw a line around.
How often is that list updated?
I never.
It's the
That's
full
probably
effort
the-
was done in the 70s.
Yeah, I don't know that it's ever been updated, and of course, buildings are older now, and there might be some other reasons for something to be deemed historic, but at the moment, that's the fairly that's probably the best thing that we have.
Yeah, and the upper echelon is if you're actually listed on the state and national register. That's a relatively small subset.
Yeah.
The other stuff, a good amount of it has probably lost its historical significance, but you don't really know that unless you've gone through the process. So I think it is important to be able to give people this number 2 option where they can, make a case for themselves without getting that decision from the state.
Yep.
Okay, and I'll correct this up above as well. Village district. Okay, so I think that's it on this chapter in terms of questions.
And I just want to mention it's 10 of 8.
Yeah.
Are we like to call this at 8 if I can? You said, was there another chart that you wanted us to pay particular attention to?
Yes,
It's not
the
this
land
chart?
use table.
The land use table, okay.
So this is the Word document in the email is chapter 6, table 620, which I think actually you have to update this. So we just talked about a couple of different changes in here. One of them was the concept of duplexes. So we're talking about the R1 district and the R2 district. Today, only thing allowed there is a single family home and an accessory dwelling unit. What we talked about when we were in the depths of the accessory dwelling unit conversation was also potentially considering duplexes being allowed in R1 and R2. Essentially, the differences are that for the owner occupancy, for the accessory dwelling units, there's an owner occupancy requirement. For a duplex, that comes off the table. For a duplex, it's also not tied to the parameters where the accessory dwelling unit is in some way like secondary or smaller than the primary unit. Essentially, having a duplex just allows more flexibility.
I'm all for it. I'm pretty sure there are duplexes in my neighborhood already in R2.
Yeah, I think that's fine. You know, a lot of times you can't even tell if there's an R2, you know, if there's a duplex. You know, I don't know that it's always exactly obvious when, you know, it just depends on the architecture of the structure, whether you even notice it's a duplex or not. So I'm okay with that.
Diane, you were.
Yeah, some of the better ones have been the ones that you don't recognize it being two distinct units, that people have done a very good cosmetic architecture of making these duplexes look like a single family home, but it's got two driveways on two sides or whatever.
Mhm.
Some people have done it well, especially with the ADUs are coming in where they've added it in. It actually looks like it's just enlarged the house. It didn't really divide it. Some people have done it well, others not so much. But I think if we encourage people to do it well, however it goes, you know, I would say let's allow it to happen. Because that would allow that more housing to happen.
Okay. So would folks like me to think about, we'll have to put some thinking into this, but would you like me to establish a specific use standard for duplexes?
Are you talking about the owner occupied piece?
Talking about, so, you know, you have a whole section that describes an accessory dwelling unit and how that works. We could create a section for a duplex that sort of describes from a design perspective that it has the look and a feel of a single family home. And how that's done is, you know, a little bit more complicated, but it could be like, you can't have two separate garages for a duplex.
Or two separate driveways or something. I don't, you know.
Yeah, like you could have two garages to try to avoid, like, you know, garages up front, two totally separate with the structure kind of joining them in the middle. So it really looks much more like.
Do we have anything like that for the other districts where we allow duplexes, and then do we change it for all of them?
Right, that's
If we're
what
gonna
I'm
do that.
sort of hesitating.
Robin,
I don't see it being a big issue for myself. I mean, I agree that some of the best duplexes do look like single family homes, but then you have some old duplexes that are clearly duplexes, but are also very nice to look at. So
Yeah. It could be something where we, you know, allow this to happen. It's not likely to happen all over the place. It's not going to be a ton of them. And then you kind of assess. And if there needs to be a, some kind of design standard put in after the fact, then you can think on how to do that.
fine. What's going on with daycare facilities down here? There's a whole,
Okay. Okay, so
They
Daycare
deleted a lot
facilities.
of conditional uses and said they're okay.
So this is tied to the edits that we made in the definitions that align with the state definitions for homes that are used as daycares up to 8, whatever they're called, 8 students, have to be treated as a single family home. You can't review them as a conditional use. But then when you get higher than that, which is the daycare home in your definitions, that I think if I have this correctly, that can be treated to a higher standard if you want to.
I guess the only question I would have is if that aligns with the language in the building code for when you have a daycare that can be a home daycare versus being considered in the next category of review and authority. And I don't think it's 8. I thought it was less than that, like 5 or something.
It used to be 6 and it was changed to 8.
Changed to 8.
Um,
So you could take care of 7 unrelated children in your home and it's still considered like a home daycare. But as soon as you go to 9, now you have a state regulated facility with different rules.
it might be once you go to 8, new rules, 7 and under.
Yeah.
It all
Less
depends
so.
on it depends on the age of the kids is what it ends up being, is that there's requirements for so many different, it's different depending on the age of the kids. You have at a younger age, you have to have more attendance than the older kids. So I'm not sure I'm a little fuzzy when it gets beyond that.
I'm looking it up for you now.
Okay, so the daycare facility is the bigger one. And you're right. The way that you had that before is conditional use, and you can still have that. The daycare home has to be treated like a single family home, and you're already doing that. That's fine. We just changed the numbers and the definitions to meet the state statute requirement. This recommendation is totally separate from that. Sorry, now that I'm reading my comment. Just suggesting that daycare facilities, because of the need for this use, I'm suggesting that you just review it as a site plan, not a conditional use.
So that would open more possibilities for small operators to exist.
It doesn't necessarily do anything different other than allow anybody who wants to do a daycare facility, which is the larger one, they are given a less subjective review process. And it's still all the same things that you review under a site plan, though. You're going to look at parking. You're going to look at how the site is laid out. You're going to look at all of the things. You're just not going to look at things like, is it compatible with the neighborhood, which is a highly subjective question.
Yeah.
That's my suggestion. I'm not like, 100, like I wouldn't break my heart if you decided you wanted to keep some of these as conditional use, and maybe it makes sense in some zoning districts to keep it as conditional review. But in some of them, like the mixed use areas, I'm not sure it needs a conditional use review.
or for that matter, the overlay for office space either, for home office. Why would we be using that conditional? We're already allowing an office to be in there. Or the village center. I mean, to me, it would make it be natural for having a daycare facility where we're trying to get people to live and work.
Right.
Sounds fine to me.
Yeah, and the only one that maybe again in the R1 and the R2, like, do you only want to allow the smaller daycare homes in those districts? But the rest of these are fine as a site plan approval as opposed to conditional use?
Scary part is that the R2, R1 and R2s probably have large enough backyards to have places for kids to play. So I'd kind of go, no, I won't restrict them. I'd really like to have those kids outside playing every so often. So if somebody's got a space to do that, well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it definitely, it still means they have to come for approval. They just don't come for the highly subjective one.
Yeah.
Okay. And then are there anything else? Nothing else in this land use table. So 803, a lot of the stuff in the other chapters was not really a whole lot of controversy. That's not to say that you don't want to look at them, but I think it's okay if we don't look at them tonight. You guys might be interested in what the fee changes have been suggested. But if you want to stop now, that's fine.
Well, Regina, I do have a question for you to think about for 803. My question when I reviewed this was, how does this affect small strips of land? I know that there was a gentleman that went around, and I'm not sure if he sold them to the village or the adjoining property owners, but he had, for whatever reason, bought lots of little small strips of land throughout the village. And I know that he had a few of them in my neighborhood. And I don't know what has happened to those, but how would this affect that?
I don't really know. They would still be, I guess, unless you had any real concern that they shouldn't be developed at all.
Well, quite frankly, a lot of them are only 10 feet wide. He had just enough property to make sure that he would be involved when that development went on. So you'd have to buy him out or something else.
And this is like still a thing, you think? Around?
I'm not aware if he sold them off or if he still owns them.
I wonder if we could search for lots that are smaller than this. Let me see about that.
I don't know if anyone saw Patrick's message,
Yes.
but he's lost his mic and speakers. He's trying to figure it out.
Okay, I can look at that, Diane, but otherwise, the point of the change in state statute and the thinking generally is that when you're in a place with water and sewer, does it really matter that your lot is a little bit smaller than 1/8 of an acre? Like, you should be able to still build on that. So that's the concept of it.
Right. Well, it's just that I don't know what the status of that gentleman's land holdings are.
Okay.
I would think
Do
that.
you remember his name? Because I might be able to search.
Start Calanges?
Okay. Let me see.
But, I don't know. Like I said, 10 feet isn't really a buildable lot, but
Right. I would not have thought that that was an issue. So
10 feet wide.
yeah,
Yeah.
he owns a lot of pieces, just okay, I have a
Aren't
subjective
the
comment.
setbacks enough so they wouldn't be able to build anything on it?
Yes,
yeah, right.
like I said, they'd have to buy him
These are
out.
all
to do
these
something.
spite strips, little,
Yeah, I could call him that. I wasn't aware of
Interesting.
them until, but I'm kind of going, anyhow. I mean, 1/8 of an acre gets to be really interesting.
10
A lot of
feet
it in my development
wide.
is 1/6 of an acre, so
Yeah.
it's a little smaller than what we got here, but
Okay. So up to you, John. I could keep going through things. I could stop talking.
I'm losing my focus, but I think I think what I want to do is I want to go back to all those new sections of section 6 and see if we have any comments, but I'm going to do that myself, not as a group.
Mhm.
And then I think this is a good time for us to stop and pick up again next time. That's my feeling. Anybody want to second me or overrule me?
no, I'll agree with you.
Can we add an additional meeting? Since I guess we technically lost one in April.
We kind of
We
did,
can-
so
we can work
I
with
mean,
Robin and Terry to do that.
why don't we continue to meet? We could meet every 2 weeks. There's not, I mean, we're supposed to have 2 meetings a month. Just because we don't have any applications doesn't mean we throw the other one away. Let's just keep going.
Yeah, that's why I'm putting it out there. Like, yeah, maybe we can plan on.
We've
meeting in
got
2
stuff to
weeks.
do that needs to kind of be sorted out and into the best extent possible in hand before July 1st. So that, we could say at least we've got a draft of what we thought we were doing, and now we just need to tweak it to, update it for the new city rules. Do we have a prayer of making that timeline? Probably not. How many more meetings do you think we need, Regina, to get kind of through all the finalized draft sections?
Well, so you've got the chart there in the email, and so you basically have looked at everything. The other
Yeah.
chapters that needed tweaks are really from Chelsea, and so some of them are real technical. We'll just get those cleaned up. That's fine.
Yeah.
But otherwise, there's nothing really that huge. I think the DRB and the city switch should not be hard, and they don't need to be talked about, really.
Right. It's just gonna happen. There are lawyers that figure that out. We don't really get to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the other stuff, I mean, the real outlier for me is the housing stuff, the inclusionary zoning stuff, because in theory, it's very simple, and you guys have the July 1 deadline in terms of just like wanting to have your ducks in order for when you're switching over to a city, but also I don't have that much time to keep being at the table here for my contract, and we have other projects that kick in on the July 1st for us in the next fiscal year. So I have to just keep kind of tight on this.
All right, good. So let's I don't know
So
what.
meeting every 2 weeks works for me because we can just kind of,
Alright, let's motor our way through it and be done. So I don't know if we probably, even if there's no application, can we just warn a meeting for 2 weeks from now, or do we have to jump through some hoops to call it a special meeting, or what happens? I mean, I don't have a problem warning something for 2 weeks, but somebody reminds me that I need like 6 months ahead of time. I got to tell everybody I'm having a meeting. So,
No, we're supposed to be scheduled for the first and third Thursdays of the month. It's already pre-warned by the internet. We just need to declare that we're having one.
the agenda can just say that we're continuing our work session.
Yep.
yeah, I think Terry was
Yes, it
trying to
can.
get agendas, yeah, in the newspaper, but for these agendas, you don't need to, so.
All right. Well, I'm just gun shy from all the warning deadlines now. So I know they're a lot longer than seems to be.
15 days.
You know. Anyway, let's get it scheduled. Let's keep going. I want to finish this up. I like the dialogue and discussion that's going on. I think we've got a great working group here. And I say keep them coming. Let's get it finished.
Sounds good. I do want to bring up one thing, and I'm sorry I missed you guys for the past like 10 minutes. Whatever happened with my computer, I lost audio, I lost video. There is one item I do unfortunately want to bring up and revisit from chapter 7, and it's around storage sheds and being located a minimum of 8 feet from the property line.
I agree with Patrick. If it's a small lot, it destroys your back garden completely.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say personally, it affects me. I'm looking to put a shed in my backyard, and it's only going to be like a 7x8 by 7x9, whatever, a small shed. But to put it, I have a fence around my backyard, and to put the shed 8 feet from the fence,
Yeah.
kind of puts the shed in the middle of the backyard. And I feel as though having a standard like that, especially in an area, residential areas where we have a lot of small lots, could be prohibitive for a lot of folks.
Is there some kind of rule that, I mean, I know a lot, some sheds have gone up in our neighborhood that look more like they're on skids, like they're a couple of concrete blocks down there, and they could essentially be moved at any time by anybody else, I'm not even sure that setback rule applies to something like a temporary, well, it probably does, but I would also encourage, I mean, you used to see this all the time, like between, be a fence down the middle and there'd be a shed a foot from the fence on both sides.
Right.
If it's not a principal structure, nobody's living in it. It's not, one's full of gasoline, the other one's full of matches, you probably.
Right. And I think it's still, Robin, correct me if I'm wrong, it still needs to go through a permit process. So it'd still have to be registered and permitted. And so I'd have to declare that it's not going like in the front against the street, that it's going in the back corner of the property along a fence
Terry
line.
issues permits for sheds, yes.
And is there a 500 square foot, like if it's over 500 square feet, it's got more of a purview than if it's
So,
less?
yeah, if it's over a certain size, then it has to come.
Like a 10 by 12 shed, 120 square feet, and it's not really a permanent structure with a foundation underneath it and all the rest of that stuff. I would say that we're, may not have a whole lot to say about those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
I've always had a problem with it. I'm glad
it's
Patrick-
currently written in our LDC, storage sheds within any residentially zoned district must be located a minimum of 8 feet from the property line. So I guess I'm proposing that we kind of revisit that section and see if there's a way to tweak that language a little bit to make it a little bit more flexible.
And these are kind of standalone things. These aren't like foundations attached to your house.
No,
All of a sudden your house is now closer than 8 feet.
Well, my neighbor's garage is within arm's distance of the side of my house, but that's a different conversation for a different time.
Yeah. Okay. I'm all right with
I thought these things went to the zoning board for variance approval. Or am I
They
wrong?
could, if we deny the application, they could go to the zoning board, but I think it's just better to have a change that says if you have a small lot, if your back lot, I don't know, is less than 20 feet, you don't have to be 5 feet from property line with that. I'm just making it up.
Even
5 foot.
five, I mean, traditionally, these kind of sheds were on the property line.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's just not uncommon in most residential communities to see that, like, usually the argument is, hey, somebody's shed is 3 feet in my property.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is because it's been there for 100 years.
One thing we'd
So-
have to make sure, that the shed cannot, cannot be located in such a position that stormwater runs off your
Yeah.
shed roof onto the neighbor's property. Would have to have something
Yeah.
like that.
Sure, yeah, and causes potential issues there, yeah. It makes sense.
Mm.
No, it's just something that I noticed as I was going through the whole process of wanting to put in the shed and then realizing that being on the planning commission and being non-compliant probably is not a good look, so,
Yeah, I think if we have some caveats about permanence and, foundation type or lack of, and size limit, maybe there's a way to get through this.
okay, so is that something, maybe, I don't want to belabor this conversation too much later tonight, but in 2 weeks from now, if I highlight it and we can kind of
Yep.
tweak some language around it?
Sure.
I think so. Maybe you could bring us something and we'll take a look at it, Patrick.
Sure. I can work on drafting a little something.
Keep it short.
All
Oh,
right.
absolutely.
Any final comments for anybody?
Very much.
I'll take a motion to adjourn, please.
A motion.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all very much. And I guess we're back remotely in 2 weeks.